All right, so today we're going deep on an article that, well, it basically throws a wrench into everything we think we know about corporate strategy.
Yeah, this one is a doozy, huh?
It really is. I mean,
Yeah.
Frick Vermeulen straight up says in the title, corporate strategy is a fool's errand. So we already know this is going to be good.
He doesn't hold back, does he?
No, he does not. So basically, his argument is that the way we think about running these big multi-divisional corporations, you know, it's totally wrong.
He really flips the script.
Yeah, I mean, we hear so much about these grand, overarching corporate strategies that, with synergies across all the different divisions and all of
That
that.
whole company's got to be working together to make this beautiful music.
Exactly, but Vermeulen's like, nah, that's all a bunch of bunk.
Yeah.
He says executives should really just be focused on shareholder return.
For each division.
Yeah, for each individual division. So instead of crafting these super elaborate strategies, they should basically be acting like
Portfolio manager.
exactly, portfolio managers with each division as a separate investment.
Kind of a radical departure from how we usually view the CEO,
Totally, right.
Right.
We usually think of the CEO as this visionary leader, setting the strategic direction for the entire company.
Guiding the ship.
Yeah, but Vermeulen's saying, nope, they should be more like shrewd investors, constantly evaluating and optimizing each division to get the most bang for their buck.
Yeah, and he argues that they're actually better equipped than anyone else to manage these investments because they have this deep understanding of the business.
Like, more so than even Wall Street analysts.
Yeah, you know those Wall Street analysts with all their fancy models and algorithms? They can only see what's on the surface.
It's all about the numbers and the spreadsheet.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But these executives, they're on the inside. They have the real insider knowledge that you just can't get from crunching numbers.
And it's not just theory. He uses a real-world example to illustrate this point.
Enron.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It's a perfect example, actually.
Yeah.
So just weeks before the whole company imploded, with that massive accounting scandal, analysts at Goldman Sachs,
They were praising Enron, right?
they're calling them like the best of the best.
They must have felt pretty silly after that.
Talk about a miscalculation.
Yeah, that's going to hurt.
But it really just shows you the limitations of external analysis, even when it's coming from these big respected firms like Goldman Sachs.
So Vermeulen's saying that corporate executives, because they're already on the inside, they're less likely to miss those crucial red flags.
Right, they have that gut feeling.
So, okay, that's one key role, the portfolio manager constantly evaluating each division for maximum return. What else does Vermeulen see these executives doing?
Well, he says they should also be acting as like a super effective board of directors.
Wait, hold on. Isn't that a bit,
Incestuous?
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. I mean, aren't boards supposed to be providing, like, independent oversight? How can executives govern themselves?
I know it sounds weird.
Yeah.
But Vermeulen argues that those external boards, the ones made up of people who only have a surface level understanding of the company,
Right.
they're inherently limited in what they can actually do.
They don't really know the company inside and out.
Exactly. It's like they're tourists trying to give directions to someone who lives there. They just don't have that deep knowledge of the landscape.
Yeah, but the top management team, they're already immersed in the business.
Right. They're living and breathing it every day.
So they have the in-depth knowledge, and they also have that direct access to the divisional leaders.
Which means they can make sure the resources are being used the right way, the strategies are solid, and that everyone's ultimately looking out for the shareholders.
Okay, so it's about leveraging that insider perspective, not just for investment decisions, but for governance as well. That's a pretty different way to think about accountability at the top.
It is. And there's one more key role that Vermeulen outlines.
Right, lay it on me.
He says executives should also act as like an in-house bank.
An in-house bank.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure I follow that one.
So think about it. Divisions often need funding to go after new opportunities.
Right.
And usually they have to go through this whole rigmarole to get external funding.
Yeah, it can be a real pain.
But Vermeulen's saying that these executives, they can be the in-house bank.
Because they can just allocate resources internally?
Exactly. They can quickly identify and fund promising opportunities within their own portfolio of divisions.
So it's all about agility. Being able to make those investment decisions faster than a traditional funding process would allow.
Precisely. And that speed can be a huge advantage, especially when it comes to private deals.
What do you mean by private deals?
Like acquisitions that happen under the radar. Those big, splashy public
The
acquisitions.
ones that make headlines.
Yeah. Those often don't actually deliver the returns that people expect.
But the quiet ones, the private deals.
Those tend to be much more successful.
Interesting. So it's almost like these executives are acting as venture capitalists, but within the company itself.
That's a great way to put it. And Vermeulen believes they're in the perfect position to play that role.
Because they already have that deep understanding of the business.
Exactly. So you know all those corporate retreats where you picture these executives huddled together trying to come up with some grand unified strategy?
Yeah.
Vermeulen's like, nope, wrong approach.
He's saying scrap that whole idea.
Yeah, he's advocating for a totally different focus.
So instead of being the grand strategist, the CEO should be the shrewd investor, the watchful guardian, and the internal venture
You
capitalist.
got it. It's definitely a provocative idea.
It really is. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about leading a large organization.
It makes you wonder if Vermeulen is right. How does this change things for the people actually rigging in these divisions?
Right. Does it change the whole relationship between corporate headquarters and the individual business units?
That's a great question, and one we'll dig into more in just a bit. This shift in thinking really has some big implications for how we view work leadership and even success within these massive organizations. But first, we got to unpack some more of the nuances of Vermeulen's argument.
Okay, let's do it. So it's interesting, though, because even though Vermeulen is saying, like, hey, these executives need to be thinking like investors, he's not saying they should just be totally hands off, you know?
Right. It's not like they can just sit back and watch the stocks go up and down.
Yeah, it's not about relinquishing responsibility. It's more about, like, using their expertise and their position to actually add value.
In very specific ways.
And it challenges that whole image of the,
The all-knowing CEO.
yeah, the CEO who dictates every single move.
The great man theory of leadership.
Exactly. Vermeulen's model is much more subtle. It's less about dictating strategy and more about setting the stage for each division to actually succeed.
Like a master gardener.
Oh, I like that.
Tending to all these different plants.
Each one needs different things to thrive.
Exactly. And Vermeulen saying instead of forcing every plant to grow the same way, you got to create the optimal environment for each one to kind of flourish on its own.
So that raises an interesting question, though. If corporate strategy in the traditional sense is a fool's errand, like Vermeulen says, what does that mean for how we think about work and leadership at every level of these companies?
I mean, it's a pretty big shift in perspective.
It's like he's saying, stop trying to fit those square pegs into round holes.
Exactly.
Each division has its own unique path to success, and trying to force them all into the same mold, you're just going to stifle their potential.
Totally. And that has implications for everything you know.
Yeah.
How teams are structured, how performance is measured, how innovation is incentivized.
Yeah, if you're not trying to create some grand unified strategy, you're probably less likely to kill that entrepreneurial spirit within those divisions.
Right. You're freeing them up to be more creative.
But let's play devil's advocate for a second here. Aren't there some situations where a strong overarching corporate strategy is still important? Like, what about companies facing a major disruption in their industry, or those trying to navigate a really complex global landscape?
Yeah, those are good points. And I'm sure Vermeulen would agree that there are times when a unified front is necessary.
Right.
But even in those cases, I think you'd argue that the best approach is still to empower those divisions to adapt and respond to challenges in their own way.
So give them the flexibility to maneuver.
Exactly. Let them make their own decisions based on their understanding of the market and the challenges they're facing.
So, this whole conversation is really making me question the concept of synergy. If we accept Vermeulen's premise, does synergy even make sense anymore?
That's a good question. Vermeulen doesn't completely dismiss the idea of synergy,
Okay.
but he does say that it's often overemphasized and kind of artificially imposed.
It's like we're so obsessed with making the orchestra sound perfect that we forget to let each musician shine individually.
Yeah, and that can lead to a lot of wasted effort and missed opportunities. Vermeulen's argument is that we should be focused on making each part as strong and successful as it can be, rather than trying to orchestrate some grand unified performance.
So it's about fostering individual strengths rather than trying to engineer some kind of forced harmony.
Exactly. And that's a really powerful idea because it challenges us to rethink our assumptions about how these big organizations should function.
It suggests a model that's more organic, more adaptable, and honestly, maybe even more human.
I think so, too.
It's almost like Vermeulen is handing us a new lens to view the corporate world through.
He is. And like any new lens, it can reveal things we might have missed before. It can challenge our preconceived notions and push us to consider different approaches.
This deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about. It's made me question some of my own assumptions about corporate strategy and leadership.
Me too. And I think what's so compelling about Vermeulen's argument is that it has implications for everyone working in these organizations, not just CEOs and executives.
So how do we take these ideas and actually apply them to our own work?
Well, I think one key takeaway is that we all have more agency than we might realize. Even if you're not setting the overall corporate strategy, you can still make a real difference within your own area.
So focus on what you can control. Make your division or your team as successful as possible, regardless of the larger corporate strategy.
Exactly. It's about being entrepreneurial within the context of a bigger organization. Identify opportunities, take initiative, build something great.
It's like being an entrepreneur, right?
That's a great way to put it.
Creating something new and innovative from within an existing structure.
Exactly. And Vermeulen's model might actually create more space for that kind of entrepreneurial spirit to thrive.
Now that's an exciting thought. It suggests a more dynamic and adaptable future for corporations where innovation can come from anywhere, not just the top.
Right. It's a much more bottom-up approach.
But if we're moving away from these grand unified strategies, doesn't that create a risk of divisions becoming too siloed?
Yeah.
How do you keep them from becoming totally disconnected from the larger organization and its goals?
That's a great question. And it's one of the potential challenges of Vermeulen's model. If you're treating each division like an independent investment, how do you make sure they're still aligned with the company's overall mission and values?
Right. You don't want them to turn into like rogue planets just drifting off on their own.
Exactly. And that's where the role of leadership becomes even more important. Even if they're not dictating strategy, those executives still need to set the tone, define the culture, and make sure everyone's rowing in the same general direction.
So it's less about control and more about creating a shared sense of purpose.
I think that's a great way to put it. And it requires a different kind of leadership, one that's more about inspiring and empowering than commanding and controlling.
It sounds like this shift that Vermeulen's proposing requires a pretty fundamental change in how we think about leadership in big organizations.
It does. It's about moving away from that traditional top-down hierarchical model of leadership.
Where everything flows from the top.
Right. And embracing a more collaborative and decentralized approach.
A model where leadership is distributed throughout the organization.
Exactly. And where success is measured not just by overall corporate performance, but by the achievements of each individual division.
So it's not just about the symphony, it's about each musician playing their best solo and contributing to a richer, more dynamic overall sound.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
This deep dive has really made me rethink my own assumptions about corporate strategy and the role of leadership. It's given me a lot to think about in terms of how I approach my own work and how I view the dynamics within my organization.
Me too. And I think it's a powerful reminder that we all have the potential to be leaders regardless of our position within a company.
And sometimes the most effective way to lead is to empower others to succeed.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we spent a lot of time unpacking this idea of corporations as investment vehicles.
Yeah, it's definitely a different way to look at things.
It really is. And it makes you think about how it impacts everyone working within those organizations.
It's not just the executives.
Exactly, because if Vermeulen is right, and divisions should be operating more like independent businesses within a larger ecosystem.
That changes the whole dynamic of work.
Yeah, it's not about pleasing the higher-ups anymore.
Right. Your success is tied to the performance of your division, not just the overall company.
So your incentives change, your priorities shift.
You're more focused on making smart decisions for your specific market or product line.
And that kind of autonomy can be really empowering.
Vermeulen's model basically says a well-managed corporation should be like a breeding ground for entrepreneurs.
Those individuals who drive innovation and growth from within.
Exactly.
Which brings me to something we haven't really touched on yet, the whole question of synergy.
Ah, yes, synergy.
If we're moving away from this idea of a grand unified corporate strategy and embracing a more decentralized model, does the concept of synergy even make sense?
It's a good question, and I think it's one that a lot of people are grappling with.
Because Vermeulen doesn't completely dismiss synergy, right?
No, he doesn't. But he does argue that it's often overblown and kind of artificially imposed.
Like we're trying to force puzzle pieces together that just don't fit.
Exactly. And sometimes that pursuit of synergy leads to these collaborations that end up being more trouble than they're worth.
They can drain resources, stifle creativity, distract from the core mission of each division.
Right. So instead of trying to engineer these elaborate collaborations across divisions, Vermeulen would say, focus on making each division as strong and successful as possible on its own.
Because sometimes the whole really is just the sum of its parts.
And by fostering the strengths of each division, you ultimately create a stronger, more resilient organization.
Okay, but isn't there a risk with that approach? Couldn't it lead to divisions becoming too siloed?
Ah, that's the big question, isn't it? It's one of the potential downsides of this model.
Because if each division is like an independent investment,
How do you make sure they're still aligned with the company's overall mission and values?
you don't want them to become like rogue planets just floating off on their own.
Exactly.
Mm.
And that's where leadership, especially at the executive level, is so important.
Even if they're not calling all the shots.
They still need to shape the culture, set the tone, and make sure everyone's generally moving in the same direction.
So it's less about control and more about creating a shared purpose.
I think that's a great way to put it. And it requires a different kind of leadership, one that's more about inspiring and empowering.
Rather than commanding and controlling.
Exactly.
It sounds like Vermeulen's model really requires us to rethink how we view leadership in these large organizations.
It does.
Yeah.
It's about moving away from that traditional hierarchical model where everything flows from the top down.
And embracing a more collaborative, decentralized approach.
Exactly, where leadership is distributed throughout the organization.
And success is measured not just by the company's overall performance, but also by the achievements of each division.
It's like giving each musician the freedom to improvise, but still making sure they're all playing in the same key.
I love that analogy. It
Yeah.
really captures the balance that Vermeulen is talking about.
Autonomy without sacrificing coherence.
Not an easy thing to achieve.
Definitely a challenge for any leader.
You know, this whole deep dive has really made me step back and rethink my own assumptions about corporate strategy.
Me too. It's a good reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
And Vermeulen's argument definitely challenges the status quo.
It's a provocation.
It makes you think about the role of corporations in a whole new light.
And whether you agree with him or not, I think he raises some really important questions.
Like, if corporations are really just investment vehicles, as he suggests, what does that mean for their social responsibility?
What are their ethical obligations?
Those are some big questions.
They really are. And maybe that's the most valuable takeaway from this conversation.
The recognition that even in the business world, there are these complex, nuanced questions that we need to be thinking about.
Exactly. It's not always black and white.
So to our listener, we leave you with this. As you navigate your own career within a large organization, remember that you have more power than you might think.
You can make a difference.
Embrace your role as an entrepreneur, challenge the status quo, and don't be afraid to question the way things have always been done.
You might just spark a whole new way of thinking.
And with that thought-provoking challenge, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.